Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Franz, music director of your Windsor Symphony Orchestra, and I am really excited to be sitting down and talking with my colleague and my friend, the associate conductor of the Windsor Symphony Orchestra, Mr. Daniel Wiley. Hello, Daniel.
Hey, Robert, how are you?
You know what? I'm doing just fine. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm fantastic. As you can see, I'm on stage. I'm super happy to be here.
I
Very
love all
excited.
the wires too. Is
Yes,
your COVID-19 project been to learn how all the wiring works for the
that's
building? So
right.
you
You know what? I've taken this downtime and I've gone over every single wire.
Now, you have been the associate conductor of the Windsor Symphony Orchestra since the fall of 2018. So you are starting officially your third season as
That's right.
associate conductor. How has it been so far?
Great. The thing that I always love to tell people about Windsor is that it's a community that's so focused on the art scene here, and particularly the symphony. And so joining the symphony here has really been like joining the larger community of Windsor. Like it's so integrated and it's so fun that way. So it's really been a pleasure and a joy for sure.
Very cool. Well, so take me back. How did you become a conductor?
Oh
Why
gosh.
conducting?
Actually, Robert, I initially wanted to be a composer. And when I was in, I think it was seventh grade, I had written my own piece of music and I brought it to my band director and I said, hey, I wrote this piece of music. Can I get a bunch of people together and perform it? And if they perform it, can I conduct? And she said, yeah, of course. And so she put it on the concert. And from then on, it was like in the history books. I conducted that very first piece in front of people. And it was the sensation of, being able to connect with the music in a physical way with my hands that was really appealing to me. And so then when I got into high school, I continued studied conducting, and my goal was, you know what, I want to be the best high school band director there ever was. Like that was goal number one for me. And so I went off to university at Boise State and started my undergraduate in music education, thinking that you know what, I'm gonna get this degree in music education. I'm gonna go be a band director, and I'm gonna live happily ever after. Done. Check. 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 Right. Well, as you well know, Robert, life doesn't work that way. And I happened to meet a certain individual, mainly you, that introduced me to orchestral music, right? At the time, you were the music director of the Boise Philharmonic, and I started studying with you, and I actually have to blame you for where I am today. Um,
Okay,
because I know, right? Yeah, yeah. Just gonna throw you right under that bus. Um, because, well, no, I mean, when I first met you and we started really delving into the orchestral conducting and what that was like, it opened up a whole new world for me, a whole new world of possibilities of music making and what kind of music could exist. And so from there, I went and got a master's degree in conducting from the University of North Texas. And I'm so fortunate that my very first professional gig, I have you as a boss. So, you've gone from mentor, friend to boss, and I'm like, I couldn't be more happy. So,
That's that's awesome. Well, we're thrilled to have you, and I do want to say that when we had the search for your position, I was keenly aware that not only you were in the search, but that there were other people who had studied with me in the search. So this is a great opportunity for me to let people know that it was the musicians and the staff of the Windsor Symphony Orchestra that chose you in this position, and I was thrilled with their choice. But I said to them, I said, "Oh, I can't be involved in this. I know all these people so well, and especially you, since we had worked so well, so long together,
yeah,
and had done
true.
so much work together." And I remember your, and you still have this, of course, but I remember your sense of curiosity that you were really sort of willing to like roll up your sleeves and delve in a big way. So seventh grade was the first time that you composed and then conducted a piece
Yes.
or had a piece performed.
Yes.
What is your first musical memory that you remember? Now, your instrument is clarinet,
My
your
instrument is
primary instrument.
clarinet, correct. But I actually started on piano. My grandmother was a pianist, and she never sat me down and said, we're going to have a piano lesson. And in fact, she also was aware of that sense of curiosity that you just talked about. And she just let me approach the piano and let me sort of explore and discover. And then once she realized that, okay, he actually is really kind of interested in this, then she really started to guide me through, like, okay, this is how you play the piano, this is a scale. And one of my most vivid memories is she used to play the Brandenburg concertos for me, and she was also a music history teacher. And here I was as a 7-year old, and she's like, okay, now it's minor, and I'm like, I don't hear minor. I don't know what that is. And she got so frustrated with me. She said, no, it's just bang the table. It's minor. Don't you hear it's minor now? And I went, I got nothing. And so now, as a professional musician looking back on that, I just find that hysterical. You know. So those are, it was a little early, but man, she was like, you don't hear that? But that's fine. But no, so those are probably the most formative musical experiences that I have. I remember, yeah, really exploring the piano, and then that particularly those Brandenburg concertos really stick in my mind.
Now, in between your undergrad at Boise State
Mhm.
University and your graduate degree at North Texas State, you taught in public schools. Tell us a little bit about that experience, because I remember seeing you teaching in those classrooms, teaching junior high choruses, and those young singers just worshipped you. They adored you. What was that like for you? What was that whole experience like?
Well, first of all, it was exhausting. For anybody who's actually ever taught before, it requires so much energy, so much of you to convey knowledge. But it's a lot more than just teaching them notes and rhythms. You're really teaching them how to be people. And so that aspect of it is you really have to pour your heart and soul into it. But it gave me a real sense of perspective. A lot of my students, a lot of them didn't have like a stable adult figure in their life, and so like music and choir was it for them. Like that was their place where they felt safe, and yeah, it just gave me perspective on life. But from a teaching aspect, um, I should tell you that both of my parents and both sets of grandparents were all teachers. So teaching sort of is like coursing in my blood. And so when I stepped into it, my first day of teaching, it actually really wasn't my first day of teaching because I had spent my entire life in a classroom watching teaching. And so there was a real, I already had a real sense of like, this is what this looks like. This is how this works. Like, I've done this
You were
since
comfortable.
I was so comfortable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But you know what it did do? It prepared me because when I did go to grad school, I found that I had a different perspective on classes and teaching, and it was interesting comparing myself to my colleagues who went directly through. Robert, it also caused a few problems because if ever I got a professor that I felt wasn't a good teacher, it was really hard for me to behave. I mean, like really hard. So,
You,
yeah,
Daniel?
I
I can't.
know, I know, I know.
What was there anything about the teaching? It was like for 3 years or so, right, at the junior high,
Two, two.
um, 2 years. Was there anything that was particularly surprising?
Oh gosh.
I mean,
I
I
think.
can tell you.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was gonna say I can tell you while you're thinking about your answer that one of the things that shocked me about going into your classroom is you had taught 13-year-olds how to sing extremely difficult, challenging music extremely well in tune. And I visit a lot of schools, and I thought, okay, this is the gold standard of what a 13-year-old can do in a classroom. It was pretty
Well,
amazing.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think I went back to basics, and it was a lot. We sometimes in teaching get stuck in this idea of, well, I've got to teach the notes and the rhythms, and then they'll know the music, right? Rather than I went back and I spent time every day teaching. Okay, this is an interval. And this is the distance between these two notes. And we spent time just singing intervals and saying, you know what, that wasn't quite a perfect fourth. Try it again. Okay, that was closer and that wasn't it. And so it was really, it's really a lot like acquiring a language. You see a symbol or you see the relationship between two symbols and it equals a sound, right? And so it was really helping define those parameters for them so that when they did get into our music, it was easy to say, hey, by the way, that's a perfect fourth. What does that sound like? And they're like, oh, it's this. And you're like, okay, great. We don't have to worry about intonation now.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's brilliant, and it served you well both as a musician and as an educator. Speaking of which, your title with the Windsor Symphony Orchestra is associate conductor, and a lot of these titles get thrown around: assistant conductor, associate conductor, resident conductor, music director,
Mhm.
all sort of describing the roles that a conductor can play. What is your role at the Windsor Symphony Orchestra as associate conductor?
Sure. So my role focuses around, well, it's quite expansive actually. I conduct both the junior youth orchestra, the youth orchestra here, and the newly-ish formed community orchestra. So that's three community ensembles that I'm in charge of. I also do, I think, when we counted them, it was probably around 65 concerts a year with the professional musicians between, our family concert series, our education concert series where we go out into schools and perform, and also our neighborhood concert series, right, where we go to different places out in the community and perform. So those in terms of performing aspect, that's sort of where my portfolio falls. The other part that maybe a lot of people don't know about is that I also have a whole education part, a further education part to my job, which you also share because you're passionate about. And that includes, going and visiting school programs in their classroom and working with those kids, doing master classes with the School of Creative Arts, and just in general, reaching out to various parts of the community to find partnerships that maybe were otherwise not possible on our main stage. When we do our main stage series, Robert, we only have, as you know, we only have so many concerts that we can do. And so there's only so many, there's a long list of people who, partners that we want to work with. And so through my neighborhood concerts and through the family concerts, I have an opportunity to continue our connecting to other groups in the community.
So, so I understand from your role as associate conductor and your previous history as a teacher in the schools how education is such a part of your portfolio and what it is that you do. Why is it important to you that orchestras are so involved in education?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think what it comes down to is that we really have a place at the table in terms of how we can connect students through either through other subject areas, but also I always go back to the emotional development of young children and them being able to hear something and understand that it either makes them feel a certain way or that it's trying to express a certain emotion. To me, I always found that really, really interesting and important. And it's so interesting that you brought up how my junior high kids were so invested in choir. I recently just found my old yearbook from when I was a teacher, and I had all my kids sign it. And one of the kids wrote, Mr. Wiley, when I joined choir, I got something that I didn't expect that I was going to get, and that's a family. And so that sense of it's a shared human experience, right? And so we're teaching young people about what it means to be a human. It just also happens to have the side benefits of you can develop your active listening skills, which can help you with, any of your subject areas or your critical thinking skills or teamwork. But for me, fundamentally, it goes down to it's a shared human experience. And we are so fortunate that we have such wonderful musicians that we can bring this music to life and really engage with kids.
Um, I think that's really well said, and I think during this, particularly this time of this pandemic, that connecting people through music is more important than ever. Which is why we have this digital concert series that the WSO is putting together for the fall of 2020. And you are going to be featured in one of the episodes conducting music of Handel and Arcangelo Corelli. Handel, you're going to be conducting parts of the Messiah by Handel, a piece that he wrote in 1741 and easily has been performed millions of times since its first performance. Is this your first time conducting it, by the way?
No, I've done bits and pieces of it. So, um,
And this version of it will not have chorus because we're not yet in a place to put safely together a group of singers, but it will be highlights from the Messiah. Tell us a little bit about what you plan to do, and also what are some of the challenges of doing a piece that has been performed for literally millions of times for the last few hundred years?
for sure. Okay, so um, I think all conductors sort of face this mountain that, whenever we pick up a piece, whether it's Handel's Messiah, whether it's a Beethoven symphony, that there is a long list of, performances that have happened by, some of the most famous musicians in the world. It's been performed here, there, anywhere, and so we have a real responsibility to, A, respect the composer's intention, but B, also be aware that you're joining a tradition of music making that has extended for quite some time. So for me, where that comes into play is it comes into play in my study. I really, especially with Handel's Messiah, it's done so much, and it's done in several different ways, that really finding your own voice to contribute to that performance history part of this is really important.
And what's intriguing about that is that I think 100 years ago, if we had had the internet and had this interview, there would have been a very specific way of thinking about the Messiah in a sort of a big, grand, romantic way.
Yes,
And since then, there's been a whole new influence of historically informed performances and a lot of scholarship that has been done to try to come closer to the original sound and intention of Handel. As you battle those two forces, because those two forces are still very much alive, how do you deal with that sort of dichotomy, sort of back and forth between the tradition of how it's been performed for hundreds of years and this new-ish idea of sort of uncovering what actually was meant to be in the original?
for sure. So mainly for me, it is based in that research that you talked about, really reading up about what, A, the composer's intentions are, but B, also what the listener's intentions are from that time period. I recently had a very interesting discussion. We just finished a listening club series here at the WSO, which was sort of a virtual walkthrough of different pieces. And I had one of my former musicology professors on, and we were talking about a Haydn symphony, and she talked about putting yourself in the shoes of a patron or a listener during that time period, and what kind of baggage we have as listeners coming to the table. And it was a really interesting discussion because we went around the room, or the virtual room, and we all discovered that, we all kind of have baggage when we have our own perspective on this music. So for me, it goes back to that research part, but also, even though it's been done this sort of grandiose way for so long, I still maintain that if you go back to how it was originally intended to be performed, it's still really exhilarating and exciting music making. And to me, I like that better. It's more authentic. It's really more what the composer intended. And I was just recently reading a book about opera and their symbolisms, and the author described how we frequently don't trust our audiences. So we try to, if there's a symbol in an opera, we try to explain the symbol in the staging rather than just staging the symbol, and trusting our audiences to pick it up, and trusting that the composer was intelligent enough to bring that to light.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting you bring that up because Handel was above
Yeah.
all an opera composer. I mean,
Yeah.
that was his meilleur. And I know that you, especially over the last couple of years, have really ratcheted up greatly the amount of opera that you've conducted. I know you had done some before, obviously, but over the past few years in Windsor, you've really become
Yes.
very invested in the opera community there and conducting. How does how does your understanding of and sort of connection to opera affect how you think about Handel's Messiah, which is obviously an oratorio that's meant to be performed in a church? It's not really
Sure.
operatic per se, but it's hard to separate Handel's opera side from his oratorio side. I mean, he's the same person.
Right. And I think the crux to that is the storytelling aspect, right? Like that the Messiah is a story that has to be told. And to go back to your initial question about how we're planning on doing it, even though it is going to be sort of highlights from the Messiah, my approach to that was, okay, how can I make sure that, A, we hear the music that we love to hear during this time of year, right? Like it's a very seasonal, for us it's a very seasonal piece, but also how do we keep that story arc at least somewhat intact? And I really feel like that the final conclusion that we came to really sort of at least alludes to the story, the sort of structural points of the story, while reducing it so that we can accommodate for doing it virtually.
Yeah. How many soloists will you have involved in this production?
We'll have two soloists. We'll have a soprano, Chelsea Van Pelt, and a bass baritone, Michael Broder. And I think Chelsea was supposed to sing with us. She sung Messiah with us before, and she was supposed to do Mozart this past season, correct? They
Exultate
couldn't.
jubilate, yes.
Yeah, so we'll bring her back because she didn't quite get her opportunity to sing that. So,
So what famous arias can listeners expect to hear?
oh gosh, the people that walk in darkness, I believe, is the first one. Rejoice, of course. I know my Redeemer liveth, and the trumpet shall sound. And we are actually going to be having members of our Windsor Symphony Orchestra Chorus tune in virtually to finish off with Halleluia Chorus. So that's sort of in the works right now and in the mix. And we thought that what a great way to end such a fantastic piece with one of the most iconic movements from it.
I think it's wonderful to end with it. It stirs the blood and it gets everything
Yes.
going. It's such an exciting piece. It's also interesting to note that of the 3.5 hour oratorio of the Messiah, that the Alleluia chorus actually is 1 hour before the end, which
Right.
I think surprises people when they hear it in total. And in part, I believe it's because the message of the entire oratorio is the redemption, which is the I know my
Correct.
Redeemer liveth
Hmm.
aria afterwards. So I'm really glad that you're including that because for me, that aria is really the whole reason why the piece was written. It's really the
Yes.
centerpiece of it.
And I will admit that the only part of me that is sad about doing Hallelujah Chorus at the end is that you don't get that dichotomy of like, here is this grandiose like Hallelujah Chorus, and then it becomes super internal. And you're saying to yourself, okay, now I understand. Now I know my Redeemer liveth, right? It's just so powerful. But we're still going to have fun and put Hallelujah Chorus at the end.
Awesome. Perfect. Perfect. I love it. I do love it. I really love it. Now, that's not the only piece that's on the program. There's another piece that is by an Italian composer, Arcangelo Corelli, and it is actually subtitled. And I just want to say that lots of symphonies over the history of time have been subtitled, and almost none of them have been subtitled by the composer themselves. In fact, most of the time, composers hate having any
Yeah.
sort of subtitle. But in this case, Corelli did title it. He wrote on the top of the score, written for Christmas Eve. This is also a concerto grosso. So let's start there. What in the world is a concerto grosso? It just sounds disgusting, Daniel. Like I'm not sure why anybody would want to see or hear a concerto grosso.
Okay, Robert. Well, so it's just a type of writing where you usually have a smaller group of soloists. In this case, it's usually two, and then you have the grosso part, which is the rest of the orchestra, right? And so it really is a conversation back and forth between the smaller group and the larger group. A lot of times. Those Brandenburg concertos that we talked about in the very beginning, those can be concerti grossi. So it's really just the structure. It has nothing to do with being, gross or unappealing in that sense, Robert. So you can take a sigh of relief. It's all good.
All right. Well, and you also threw out that grossy grosso thing. That's a little bit different too, because if you don't, here's the thing about classical music. It seems like if you don't speak a little Italian, a little French, a little German, you can get stuck pretty quickly. And so for our friends out there who maybe don't speak Italian, one concerto grosso, two concerti grossi.
Grossi. Hmm.
Just so we're all on the same page about how
Ah,
many
yes. Sorry,
concerti
sorry.
grossi we're talking about. But those, you're exactly right. Those Johann Sebastian Bach Brandenburg concertos are also concerto grosso style, which was typical at the time. What can we expect to hear when we listen to this concerto? It's pretty iconic in many ways, and it's exquisitely beautiful. And it's, by the way, in honor of your grandmother, it is in a minor key, which I also find kind of odd for Christmas Eve. It seems like it would be a happier key than minor, but who am I to judge?
Well, and also, I mean, of the sentiment of the time to keep something in minor for that long is a little strange, but yes, the structure of it is it's in six movements, and I like to think of them as like little vignettes. You know, it's sort of like a little glimpse at an idea or an image, and you sort of just get to taste things. You know, it's not like the Messiah. You know, is three can be 3 hours long. This is only about 12 minutes total in length. And you just get a taste of different styles of different sounds. And it ends with the really famous pastoral, right? Which is sort of this, you know, lilting, sweeping, sort of pasture-like theme. And the thing that I find so interesting and maybe connects it more to sort of a Christmas feel is that it ends quietly, right? It sort of ends and dies away that way. Which when we think about, you know, sometimes when we think about pieces like, oh no, we want to know when to clap, right? And this would be one of those pieces where you go, it's done? Okay, it's done.
Yeah, but see, the great thing here is that because people will be watching at home, they can clap whenever they wish. They can
That's
clap
right.
during it, before it, after it.
Sure.
Just clap
Oh, but
Daniel,
I think it does pair nicely with the Messiah for sure. I'm really excited about it.
it definitely has a nice arc for the concert, and I think for folks who love Messiah, I think they're going to love the Corelli, and I think for people who love Baroque music, this combination is going to be just exquisite. And under your capable hands, I think it's going to be a really extraordinary evening for all involved.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. It's great to be here.